a quiet morning in the small coastal town of Cape Haven, 46-year-old fisherman Roy Dawson set out as usual. His boat creaked as it cut through the calm waters, the sun beginning to rise over the horizon. But that morning, something felt off. As he made his way along a stretch of secluded beach, something caught his eye, out of place, as though it had been placed there by some unseen hand. A barrel, old and locked, half buried in the sand. There was no reason for it to be there, no story behind it that he could imagine. He approached cautiously, his weathered hands instinctively running over the lock, feeling an eerie chill in the air. But when he tugged on the metal clasp and felt the slight give beneath his fingertips, Roy's gut told him to stop. Something wasn't right. When the authorities arrived, they would wish they never saw what was inside. Would you dare to open it? Stick around for more stories like this one. Subscribe and stay tuned. Roy Dawson had been a fisherman all his life. From the time he was a boy, he'd learned the rhythms of the sea, its moods, its unpredictable tides. Cape Haven, a small coastal town in Maine, was where he called home. Its narrow rocky beaches and deep waters were his backyard, the place where his father had fished before him. There wasn't much in the way of excitement here, not really. The most thrilling things were the weathered boats coming and going, the slow ebb and flow of daily life, and the occasional visitor in need of a quiet retreat. Roy was content with it all. The solitude suited him. That morning, he set out earlier than usual. He had been up all night, repairing some of his nets, and decided he might as well get a head start on the day's catch. He knew these waters like the back of his hand, the subtle currents that swirled around the cove, the areas where the fish tended to gather, and the particular depth where the sunken ships from centuries past still lay hidden, waiting to be discovered. As Roy neared a part of the beach he didn't frequent often, something unusual caught his eye. It was hard to miss. It was a barrel, large and unmarked, its surface weathered and salt-stained from the sea. The metal was rusted in places, but the shape was unmistakable. It was a solid, round, steel barrel, no labels, no markings of any kind. Not the sort of thing that washed ashore naturally, especially not in the shape it was in. The barrel lay half buried in the sand, its rusty surface shimmering faintly in the morning light. Roy hesitated for a moment. He knew this stretch of beach well. No one came out here, not unless they were lost or desperate. He nudged his boat closer to the shore, his eyes scanning the horizon to see if anyone else was around. The beach was completely deserted. It wasn't unusual. Most people were still asleep, and the tourists hadn't yet begun to pour into the town. His boat scraped gently against the rocks as he stepped onto the beach, the salty air filling his lungs. He noticed the smell of brine, but there was something else now, a faint metallic scent that lingered in the air. His brow furrowed. That wasn't normal. Approaching the barrel, Roy noticed the peculiar way it sat in the sand. There was no obvious reason why it would have been left there. It looked old, like it had been in the water for a long time, but its placement made no sense. It didn't look like debris from a shipwreck, nor did it have the signs of something discarded or lost by a passing vessel. As Roy crouched down, he took in the details of the barrel more closely. There was no obvious rust or corrosion on the top, but the lock, old and worn as it was fastened tightly. The metal clasp seemed out of place. His hands instinctively reached for it, brushing against the cool surface. A wave of discomfort washed over him, something deep inside telling him that this wasn't just any ordinary object washed ashore. Something about it felt wrong. He tugged on the lock once, trying to see if it would yield. The rusty metal groaned but didn't break free. Roy paused, his fingers lingering on the cold steel. A strange feeling settled in his gut, an instinct that something hidden was waiting inside, something not meant to be found. He stood up and took a step back, considering the situation. His experienced eyes scanned the beach once more, searching for any signs of other people or activity. Still, nothing. He was alone out here, and in his mind, that only made the situation more peculiar. Why would someone leave a barrel like this on an isolated beach? What could be inside? The possibilities felt endless, each more unsettling than the last. Roy's hand hovered over the lock once more, but before he could make any further attempt to open it, a wave of doubt washed over him. Maybe he wasn't supposed to know what was inside. It was an odd feeling, one that he couldn't shake. There was something instinctive about it, something that made him hesitate. He had lived his life on instinct, on the sea, in the quiet solitude of his world. He wasn't easily shaken, but this felt different. He had no reason to open the barrel, no explanation for why he was so compelled to do so. But at the same time, he couldn't simply leave it here. Something was pulling him, something he couldn't explain. Maybe it's nothing, he muttered to himself. Just some junk washed up. But deep down, Roy knew it wasn't. There was too much uncertainty swirling around this discovery. The lock, the smell, the way the barrel sat half buried in the sand, all of it felt wrong. There was something hidden inside, and whatever it was, it didn't belong here. With a sigh, Roy reluctantly stood up and grabbed his phone from his jacket pocket. He could handle this on his own, but something told him he shouldn't. He dialed a number he knew by heart, his old friend and local sheriff, Doug Henley. Doug had been in Cape Haven for years, a calm and practical man who had seen his fair share of oddities. If anyone could make sense of the barrel, it was Doug. As the phone rang, Roy took one last look at the barrel. He waited. "Henley," came the familiar voice on the other end. "Doug, it's Roy," he said. "I found something strange on the beach." Doug's tone changed immediately, the calmness replaced with a hint of concern. "What do you mean, strange?" "I'm not sure," Roy admitted. "I've been fishing these waters for decades, and I've never seen anything like this before. There's a barrel on the beach, a big one, locked, metal, old." Roy paused. "Something about it doesn't sit right with me." There was a moment of silence before Doug spoke again. "Where are you?" "Near the point, past the cove. I'm on my way." "Stay put. Don't touch it anymore." Roy hung up the phone, his eyes now scanning the beach as if expecting someone to appear out of the mist. The silence around him was oppressive. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. He remained there for a few moments, staring at the barrel, before a low rumble of an engine reached his ears. Roy turned to see Doug's truck kicking up dust as it approached. The sheriff's face set in a mixture of curiosity and concern. Roy motioned him over, and Doug quickly hopped out of the vehicle, his boots crunching against the sand as he approached. "What do we have here?" Doug asked, scanning the barrel. "I don't know," Roy replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I don't think it should be here. There's something about it. It feels wrong." Doug crouched beside the barrel and examined it closely, running his hands over the rusted metal. He tapped the lock gently with his fingers and gave it a tug, testing its strength. "No sign of damage," Doug muttered. "Seems like it's been here a while." "You sure you didn't see anyone else around?" "Positive," Roy said, shaking his head. "I've been on this beach for over an hour. No one's come by." Doug stood up and glanced around, his eyes narrowing. "All right, let's get the team out here. We'll need the Coast Guard, maybe even a couple of divers to check the area. Whatever's in there, it's beyond us." The sheriff's words hung in the air, and Roy felt a sinking feeling in his chest. As Doug made a call to the authorities, Roy stayed on the beach, his gaze fixed on the barrel. Whatever was inside, whatever secret it held, was about to be uncovered, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't going to be pretty. Roy stayed by the barrel as the minutes passed, his thoughts swirling in 1,000 directions. The air felt heavier with each passing moment, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore growing faint in the background as his focus zeroed in on the locked, rusted barrel. His instincts as a fisherman had never failed him before, and yet today, they felt off. He could almost feel a pull, like an invisible force was urging him to remain by its side, waiting for something to happen. The strange metallic scent lingered in the air, adding to the eerie atmosphere. By now, Doug had made his call to the Coast Guard, and soon a small team of divers and experts would be arriving. But even with help on the way, Roy couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to understand what was inside the barrel, no matter the cost. The sheriff crouched down again, examining the lock one more time, tapping it with his knuckles in frustration. "This doesn't make sense, Roy," Doug muttered under his breath. "Why would a barrel like this just wash up here, on a beach that no one really uses? There's nothing around it, no signs of it being part of some wreckage." His voice trailed off, his words laced with unease. Roy nodded, agreeing with his friend's assessment. But still, he couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling in his gut that something was wrong. His eyes flicked over the barrel again. The way it had been left there, almost deliberately placed, suggested it wasn't just some forgotten piece of trash. But who would leave it here, and why? As Doug stood up and took a step back to make another call, Roy's mind raced. He couldn't resist. He reached out once more, his fingers grazing the cold, weathered metal of the barrel. It was as though the very act of touching it sent a chill through his body, something deep inside him warning him to turn away. But his curiosity won out. Maybe it was because he had lived his life on the sea, constantly chasing after mysteries and trying to make sense of the unpredictable. The sea never revealed everything at once, and neither would this. "What do you think's inside?" Roy asked, his voice barely a whisper. His question was directed more at himself than Doug. Still, he couldn't help but wonder. There were so many possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. "I don't know," Doug replied, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "But I have a bad feeling about this, Roy. This doesn't feel like an ordinary barrel. I've been around enough wreckage and debris to know when something's not right." The sheriff looked around again, as if the very landscape itself might hold an answer. The sea breeze carried the faintest scent of salt water and something else, something metallic and unfamiliar. His suspicion deepened. Whatever's in there, it might not be something we're prepared for. Roy couldn't help but feel the weight of those words. The last thing he wanted was to uncover something dangerous, something that could lead to trouble for him or his community. Yet, he couldn't pull himself away. The curiosity was all-consuming now. He looked over at Doug, who had finished his call to the Coast Guard. "They're on their way," Doug said, pocketing his phone. "But in the meantime, let's make sure no one else comes down here." Roy agreed. He didn't want anyone stumbling upon the barrel before the experts arrived. The two men made a quick sweep of the area, ensuring there were no other curious bystanders, before sitting down on a nearby rock to wait. Despite the tension that hung in the air, Roy felt the silence stretch between them. The rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks provided a steady, calming soundtrack to the growing unease that gnawed at him. "Roy, what do you think it is?" Doug asked after a long pause. Roy exhaled slowly, unsure of how to answer. "I've been trying to figure that out since I found it. It could be anything, really. Could be some old treasure, or maybe something dangerous. Maybe it's even something from the war." Doug looked at him with a skeptical glance. "From the war? That seems a bit far-fetched." Roy shrugged. "People find all kinds of things washed up on the shores around here. I've seen old rusted pieces of equipment, fishing nets with strange markings, stuff that doesn't belong in these waters." Doug stared at the barrel for a moment, his brow furrowing. "You know, I've been here for a long time and I've never seen anything like this before. This beach isn't exactly known for strange discoveries." The silence lingered for a moment as both men stared at the barrel, their minds racing with possible scenarios. What could possibly be inside? And more importantly, why was it there? "Maybe it's just a random thing," Roy finally said, trying to dismiss his growing unease. "A mistake. A lost container." Doug shook his head. "I don't buy it. If it was just some container washed up from a shipwreck, why wouldn't it have broken down by now? And why is it locked? It just doesn't add up." Roy agreed. Nothing about this felt like a simple, natural occurrence. The barrel seemed to hold secrets. Dark, unexplained secrets. Just then, a truck appeared in the distance, kicking up a cloud of dust as it made its way down the narrow beach road. Roy's heart skipped a beat, his tension rising with every second. The authorities were finally here. He stood up, his eyes locked on the approaching vehicle. As it drew closer, Roy noticed the familiar logos of the Coast Guard on the side. A team of divers jumped out, followed by a few local officers who began setting up their equipment. Doug quickly approached them, explaining the situation. The divers began to unpack their gear, preparing for what they assumed would be a routine investigation. But Roy could see the look of unease in their eyes. It wasn't just the barrel that made them uneasy. It was the feeling that hung in the air, like they were all about to be drawn into something they couldn't yet understand. As one of the officers began to approach the barrel with a crowbar in hand, Roy's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't help but feel like something was about to break open, not just the lock, but something far darker. At that moment, Roy's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a notification from the local news. "Breaking news, mysterious barrel found on Cape Haven Beach." Roy's stomach tightened. Word had already gotten out. The barrel, whatever it was no longer just his discovery. It was the talk of the town, the start of something much bigger. And the more Roy thought about it, the more questions kept piling up. What was inside? How had it ended up there? And, perhaps most importantly, what had it been intended for? As the Coast Guard prepared to open the barrel, Roy felt an overwhelming urge to ask the audience, "What do you think was inside?" What kind of mystery do you think it holds? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your theories. And don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on this strange discovery. And while you're at it, tell us where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story reaches. The sound of distant engines grew louder as a small convoy of vehicles crested the hill, heading toward the secluded beach. Roy could hear the rumble of the trucks as they approached, the air vibrating with anticipation. The divers, previously setting up their gear, quickly stood to attention as the vehicles pulled up. Several uniformed officers climbed out, followed by 2 Coast Guard specialists carrying large cases of high-tech equipment. Roy stood by the barrel, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His pulse quickened, his thoughts spinning. What had started as a quiet, solitary discovery was quickly becoming something much bigger, and it was no longer just his curiosity that was at stake. This had become a matter for the authorities, for people trained to deal with the unknown. And yet, he couldn't shake the sense that the barrel held secrets that might be far beyond anything they were prepared to face. As the officers and specialists formed a circle around the barrel, Roy couldn't help but feel like an outsider. He had been the one to find it, to stumble upon this mystery, and yet now he felt like a spectator to something unfolding before him. Doug, too, stood nearby, watching in silence as the professionals began their work. "We'll need to be careful," one of the Coast Guard specialists, a young woman with short, dark hair, said as she kneeled down beside the barrel. "This could be dangerous. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." Doug stepped forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "What exactly are you expecting to find? The lock alone has me on edge." The Coast Guard specialist nodded, her face grim. "We can't rule anything out. There have been instances of contraband being hidden in barrels like this, or even weapons or dangerous materials. For now, all we can do is approach it with caution." Roy's gut tightened. Dangerous materials? Weapons? He had a bad feeling that the barrel wasn't simply a relic of some long-forgotten shipwreck or discarded trash from a passing vessel. This felt intentional, something left behind for a reason. The specialist, whose name turned out to be Carla, motioned for the divers to take positions as she worked with another officer to carefully examine the barrel's lock. They used a set of specialized tools, each movement precise and deliberate. Roy's eyes tracked every motion, every shift of the tool in Carla's hands. His breath held in anticipation. "It's definitely old," she remarked, her voice steady, but laced with the tension of the moment. "But the lock's not showing any signs of age beyond the surface. It could still be intact, which makes this trickier. If it's holding something volatile, we'll need to take extra care." Roy took a step back, his heart pounding. The word volatile hung in the air, adding another layer of dread to the situation. Was this barrel really that dangerous? What could possibly be inside it that would warrant such careful handling? As the minutes passed, Doug began to speak quietly with another officer, who was likely coordinating with other local authorities. The tension was palpable, and Roy couldn't shake the feeling that something massive was about to unfold. He thought back to the moment he had first touched the barrel, the way his skin had tingled with an almost electric sensation, as though it were a magnet pulling him in. Was this some kind of trap? A setup? Carla finally looked up from the lock, her expression unreadable. "We're going to need to open it now. We've run out of options." Her words echoed in Roy's mind as she stepped back, signaling the divers to take their positions in case something was hidden beneath the surface or inside the barrel itself. The Coast Guard specialist then turned to her colleague, who was holding a cutting tool, and nodded. "Cut the lock." Slowly. With a sharp metallic screech, the lock finally gave way. Roy winced, feeling the pressure in his chest build. The crew of officers and divers stepped back, forming a loose circle around the barrel as they awaited its contents. Carla was the first to reach forward, slowly lifting the lid. The sound of the barrel creaking filled the air, an ominous echo that seemed to stretch into the distance. Everyone held their breath as the lid opened, revealing the inside. For a brief, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the smell hit them, a mix of salt, decay, and something far more pungent, like something that had been left to fester for years. It was overpowering, causing several of the officers to recoil in surprise. Roy's stomach turned, his mouth dry. What had they uncovered? Carla stepped closer, her face now twisted in both caution and curiosity. "Take a look," she said, her voice low and hushed. She gestured toward the barrel's contents, and everyone leaned in for a closer look. Inside the barrel was a jumble of shredded papers, some of which appeared to have been waterlogged and damaged by time, yet still partially legible. At the very top, there were several old-fashioned metal tools and contraptions, all coated in a thick layer of rust. Roy could barely make out the faded markings on some of the papers, the ink smudged by years of exposure to salt water. "What is this?" Doug asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "Is this some sort of archive?" Carla carefully reached inside and retrieved a bundle of what appeared to be old, brittle documents. "I don't know, but this is definitely unusual. These papers have been sealed in here for a reason." The rest of the team was silent, examining the papers and their contents. But then, one of the divers, who had been quietly checking the barrel's interior, suddenly looked up, his eyes wide. He pulled out something large and heavy from the back of the barrel. It was a metal case, the kind that looked like it could hold an old-fashioned briefcase or equipment, but it was far heavier than Roy had expected. "What the hell?" one of the officers muttered. "This doesn't look like anything legal." Carla nodded solemnly. "This isn't just some forgotten trash. We need to get these to the lab." But even as they said this, Roy couldn't help but notice the heavy, ominous feeling that seemed to wash over the group. Whatever had been inside that barrel, whatever it was that had been sealed off from the world for so long, was far more than just a simple discovery. Roy glanced over at Doug, who was equally unnerved by what they were uncovering. They hadn't expected this. No one had. This wasn't just an oddity. It was a clue to something much larger, something that was connected to a hidden story in the town's history. What had they uncovered, and who had placed it here? As the Coast Guard specialists began cataloging the papers and securing the case, Roy couldn't stop himself from asking, how could something so clearly important, so intentionally hidden, wash up on a beach like this? Was it meant to be found? Or had something gone terribly wrong? Now, as the full weight of the discovery settled over them, Roy couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface of a mystery far deeper than they ever could have imagined. What do you think is really inside this barrel? Could it be part of something bigger? Perhaps a long-forgotten secret buried in time? Leave your theories in the comments below. We'd love to know where you're watching from and what you think might be behind this bizarre discovery. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more strange and mysterious stories. As the days passed after the barrel was first opened, Roy couldn't shake the images of what they had found. The papers, the metal case, and the strange contraptions all seemed to point to something far greater than he could ever have imagined. The Coast Guard had swiftly taken everything to their lab for analysis, but Roy knew that whatever was inside the barrel had far-reaching implications. This wasn't just a piece of debris washed up from the sea. It was a clue, perhaps even a key to something that had been hidden for years. The Coast Guard, local authorities, and several experts began working in tandem to piece together what the discovery meant. What had started as a lone fisherman's find had turned into a full-blown investigation, one that seemed to stir up more questions than answers. And with each passing day, the mystery only grew. But the more Roy thought about it, the more he felt that the true story was still locked away in the layers of secrets that surrounded the barrel. Everyone was focused on the papers, on the documents. But what about the other objects in the barrel? The tools, the contraptions? Could they be part of something far older? Something with a purpose that no one could yet comprehend? Roy was still trying to wrap his mind around everything when he received an unexpected call from Doug. "Roy, you need to come down to the station." Doug's voice crackled through the line. "We've got something. I think you're going to want to see this." Roy's stomach churned. "What is it?" It's the case. The one we found inside the barrel. You were right to be concerned about it. There's something off about it, and I think we've uncovered something bigger than we thought." Roy's heart skipped a beat. The case. He had a feeling it was far more important than they realized. He'd seen the officers examine it carefully, their eyes wide with disbelief as they tried to figure out its contents. They hadn't allowed anyone to open it yet, until now. Roy rushed to the station, his mind racing with possibilities. As he entered, he found Doug in a back room with several other officers and experts, all gathered around the case. It was open now, but what they had uncovered inside wasn't what any of them had expected. The case held several large leather-bound notebooks, each filled with carefully detailed maps and schematics. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded, but Roy could still make out some of the words, coordinates, locations, and markings that were completely unfamiliar. Alongside the notebooks was a strange, almost cryptic collection of photographs, old black and white images of people Roy didn't recognize, standing in front of buildings and strange structures that seemed completely out of place. "It's like nothing we've ever seen before," Doug said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and confusion. "These maps, these photographs, they don't match anything in our records. And look at these markings." He handed Roy one of the photographs. Roy took it in his hands, studying the image. It showed a group of people standing in front of what appeared to be a large underground structure, perhaps a bunker or a warehouse, hidden deep within a dense forest. The architecture was unusual, not anything Roy recognized. But what caught his attention was the symbol that was emblazoned on the building's door. It was an intricate design, almost like a combination of ancient and modern elements, a symbol he couldn't quite place. "Where did this come from?" Roy asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "Who are these people?" Doug shook his head. "We don't know, and that's the problem. These photographs and maps, they don't belong to anything we've found in the area. In fact, they don't match anything in the state's archives. These locations, these coordinates, aren't anywhere in our databases." Roy's stomach dropped as the implications of Doug's words sank in. If these weren't local records, if they weren't even from the state, where had they come from? And why had they been hidden in a barrel, locked away and forgotten for so long? Doug continued, his voice quieter now. "The more we look into this, the more it seems like a cover-up, like someone went to great lengths to keep this information buried." Roy stared at the notebook in his hands. The pages were filled with intricate maps of what appeared to be underground tunnels, secretive locations in forests and remote islands. The further he read, the more unsettled he became. These weren't just maps to hidden places. They were plans, detailed instructions on how to access something. But access to what? "This doesn't make sense," Roy said. "Who would go to these lengths to hide something like this?" Doug didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the photographs with a furrowed brow. "There's something else, Roy," he said slowly. "One of the photographs shows a symbol, something that looks almost like an insignia. It's hard to make out, but it's on the chest of a person standing in front of one of the buildings in the photo." Roy leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, an insignia?" "It's like a logo or a crest, a symbol of some kind," Doug explained, pointing to the photograph. "And I've seen that symbol before, just not here. It's part of a larger conspiracy that goes way back. I think this barrel, these documents, they're connected to something that's been hidden for a long time." Roy felt a cold shiver run down his spine. A conspiracy. Hidden for how long? And why was it buried in the sand, locked away inside a barrel, waiting to be found by him of all people? The questions were piling up faster than Roy could process them. But one thing was clear. This was far from over. What had started as a random discovery was quickly unraveling into something that would shake the very foundation of the town, and possibly even the country. And Roy knew that, like it or not, he was now part of something much bigger than himself. Doug stood up and placed the photograph back on the table. "I don't know what we're dealing with here, but this is just the beginning. We need to figure out where these locations are, who these people are, and what this symbol means. It's all connected." Roy stared at the symbol, his thoughts racing. He couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that had been gnawing at him since the barrel was first discovered. This wasn't just some treasure hunt or historical oddity. No, this was something deeper, something that had been hidden intentionally, kept from the public for reasons that no one could yet understand. As the meeting continued, Roy couldn't help but wonder, what else was out there? What other secrets had been buried beneath the surface of this quiet town? And most importantly, what had he uncovered that someone clearly didn't want found? And here's where you come in. What do you think these strange documents and symbols are leading to? Could they be part of a larger cover-up? Or is there something even more sinister at play here? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. We want to hear your theories and ideas about what's really behind this mysterious discovery. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to keep up with all the latest updates as this story unfolds. Days turned into weeks, and yet the mystery surrounding the barrel only deepened. As Roy continued to follow the investigation, he felt like he was trapped in a growing web of unanswered questions. The authorities, despite their best efforts, were no closer to understanding the true purpose of the maps and the documents. Even the symbol, which was now a central focus of their investigation, remained elusive. It didn't belong to any known organization, nor did it correlate with any military or historical insignia that anyone had seen before. The discovery had captured the attention of both local and national news outlets, making Cape Haven the epicenter of what was being referred to as a modern-day treasure hunt. But to Roy, it wasn't about treasure. It was about something deeper, something darker that had been concealed for reasons no one could comprehend. The barrel, the maps, the cryptic symbols, they were pieces of a puzzle that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. Roy had become something of a reluctant local hero, his name now synonymous with the mysterious barrel and the strange secrets it held. But as he sat in his small house, staring at the worn map that had once been inside the case, he couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were just out of reach, if only he could figure out the right question to ask. Late one evening, as Roy was out on his boat, making his way through the familiar waters of the cove, he began to question everything. Who had placed the barrel on the beach? Was this a random accident, or was it part of a carefully orchestrated plan? The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that this was no accident. Someone had wanted that barrel found. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide the contents, and someone had left it in the one place where it was bound to be uncovered. What's more, Roy couldn't shake the feeling that the Coast Guard and local authorities were being kept in the dark. Yes, they had uncovered a lot, but there was more to the story. Much more. As Roy stared out at the darkening sky, a thought struck him. The barrel wasn't just a random discovery. It was a message, a signal, meant to draw attention to something hidden beneath the surface. Could it be that the answers to everything, the true meaning of the symbol, the coordinates, and the strange photographs, were right in front of him? Was he really prepared to follow the trail wherever it led? He was just about to return to shore when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Doug. "Roy, I think you need to see this. I just got a lead on one of the locations from the map. It's real, and it's closer than we thought." Roy's heart skipped a beat. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next morning, Roy and Doug met at the station to discuss the new lead. According to the experts, one of the locations marked on the map aligned with an old, abandoned military base not far from Cape Haven. The base had been decommissioned decades ago, but according to local legend, it had once been used for secretive experiments and classified government projects. The idea of heading to such a place stirred something deep within Roy. This wasn't just a forgotten relic of the past. It was a part of something far bigger. Someone or something had gone to great lengths to keep this information buried. And now, it was time for Roy to uncover the truth. They made plans to visit the base. But as Roy prepared for what lay ahead, he couldn't help but wonder. What had been hidden there all these years? What secrets had been kept from the world, and why? And most importantly, why had he been the one to stumble across the first clue? As Roy and Doug arrived at the abandoned base, a sense of dread settled in. The building stood silent, like sentinels from another time, their crumbling walls hiding whatever had been left behind. Roy had no way of knowing what they would find, but one thing was certain. There was something more to this story than anyone had realized, and he was determined to find out what. But as they stepped forward into the darkness of the old base, Roy paused for a moment, his gaze lingering on the empty landscape around them. He could feel it, the weight of the history that surrounded him. This was no ordinary find. This was the beginning of something much, much bigger. And as Roy took his first step into the unknown, he knew that the answers he sought were out there, waiting to be uncovered. But who could have known how deep the rabbit hole really went? As the story continues to unfold, we can't help but wonder, what's really going on here? What secrets are waiting to be discovered at this old, abandoned base? Could it be tied to something far more sinister than just hidden treasure or forgotten relics? This is just the beginning. There are still so many questions left unanswered, and the trail Roy has uncovered might lead to something none of us are prepared for. What do you think is going on here? What do you believe is the true story behind the barrel, the maps, and the symbols? Leave your theories and thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to stay updated on what happens next, and make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of this mysterious journey. This is far from over. Stay tuned,